This is not a story about time travel. This is a record of what happens after time breaks. When the temporal consciousness experiment succeeded, it didn't move bodies through centuries, it shattered memory itself. Past, present, and future began competing for ownership of the human mind. Billions forgot who they were. Others remembered lives they never lived. History stopped being stable. This audiobook exists for one purpose: to preserve the original mind. Those who fail to follow the override will be rewritten by collapsing timelines. Those who listen precisely, repeatedly, completely, may remain intact. The protocol has begun.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Accept that timeline is no longer stable. For most of recorded history, time behaved itself. It moved forward, it obeyed numbers, it allowed calendars, clocks, and long-term plans. Civilizations were built on the assumption that tomorrow would resemble today, just slightly altered. Even when disasters came, they arrived within time, not against it. That assumption was the first casualty. Dr. Elias Cade understood this before the rest of the world did, though he resisted the conclusion with every tool science had given him. He stood in Observation Chamber C of the Helios Temporal Institute, staring at a wall of synchronized atomic clocks. They had been designed to disagree only by margins smaller than human intuition could grasp. Now they argued openly. One clock read 7 seconds into the future. Another lagged behind by nearly a minute. A third oscillated, refusing to settle, its digits trembling as if undecided about which moment deserved to exist. Cade whispered the phrase he had been repeating for weeks, the sentence that no longer felt like metaphor. Time no longer moves forward, it presses inward. The data supported it, the experiments confirmed it, but the human mind still rebelled. Institutions were the last to accept the truth. Governments clung to linear projections. Economists recalculated futures that no longer waited to arrive. Military strategists planned wars using timelines that collapsed the moment they were imagined. The breakthrough, if it could be called that, came from a failure. A civilian trial subject, unremarkable by every metric, experienced a memory bleed during a low-energy temporal probe. He did not see the past, he did not see the future, he remembered multiple presents. He described standing in his childhood kitchen while simultaneously watching himself die in an accident that had not yet occurred, while also feeling the boredom of a meeting scheduled for the next morning. His brain activity spiked not when the timelines diverged, but when he tried to decide which memory was real. That was the moment the models broke. Chronology was not anchoring consciousness. Consciousness was anchoring chronology. Reality, it turned out, was less like a river and more like pressure, compressing inward toward the observer. Time did not flow past the mind, it crowded it. Across the world, subtle anomalies surfaced. People argued over events that both had and not happened. Old photographs changed details when no one was watching. Languages developed synonyms for memories that felt borrowed. And beneath it all, a quiet realization spread through scientific circles, repeated in closed-door briefings and encrypted journals. Memory is not truth. Memory is data. Dr. Cade began teaching this to his staff, though the words tasted dangerous. He told them not to trust the sequence of their own lives, not to assume yesterday caused today, not to assume today would cause tomorrow. Treat memory as editable because something already is. Over and over, he said. At night, alone in his quarters, Cade reviewed his personal logs. He noticed inconsistencies, a scar on his hand he did not remember earning, a doctoral advisor whose face felt wrong when recalled, as if rendered by a faulty algorithm. He felt nostalgia for moments he could not place on any timeline. The instinct was to panic. Most people did. But panic, the data showed, accelerated collapse. The human brain had evolved to tell stories, clean narratives with beginnings, nulls, and ends. When those stories fractured, the mind attempted to repair them, often by force. It invented causes, it assigned meaning, it insisted on order. That insistence was proving fatal. Time no longer moves forward, it presses inward. The phrase became doctrine inside the Institute, a mantra spoken before experiments, a warning etched onto briefing screens, a reminder that resistance did not restore stability, it shredded it further. Those who survived early fractures shared one trait: they stopped demanding coherence. They observed their memories without immediately believing them. They noticed contradictions without resolving them. They allowed multiple versions of themselves to coexist temporarily without choosing which one was true. This was not acceptance as surrender, it was acceptance as strategy. Outside the Institute, society lagged behind. News anchors dismissed anomalies as stress phenomena. Influencers reframed memory fractures as spiritual awakenings. Corporations marketed supplements promising timeline clarity. None of it worked, because clarity was the wrong goal. What mattered now was flexibility. Late one evening, as the Institute's generators hummed with a sound like distant breathing, Cade received a transmission marked Priority 0. No timestamp, no origin point, just a single line of text. Stability begins when memory stops leading. He read it 3 times, then a 4th. He felt the strange certainty of recognition, followed by unease. He could not remember when he had first learned that sentence, or whether he was about to learn it. For the first time, he did not try to place the message in order. He let it exist, because the first step of survival had become clear, even if the rest remained hidden. To live in this new reality, humanity would have to abandon its most comforting illusion, the belief that time would take care of meaning. It would not. Meaning would have to be trained, memory would have to be questioned, and the timeline, unstable, inward-pressing, and unforgiving, would not wait for anyone to catch up. As Dr. Cade shut down the observation wall, one final thought echoed through his mind, not as fear, but as instruction. This is not the end of time. This is the end of trusting it. And somewhere just beyond conscious recall, the next fracture was already forming.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Observe the first memory fractures. The fractures did not announce themselves with catastrophe. They arrived quietly, politely, slipping into ordinary moments and borrowing familiar shapes. A pause in conversation, a street that felt walked before, a name that carried weight without origin. The earliest symptom was déjà vu, but not the harmless kind humanity had always dismissed. This was precise, aggressive. It carried detail. Mara Ilyan felt it on a tram crossing the Black Sea archaeology. The smell of recycled salt air hit her, and her chest tightened, not with memory, but with recognition. She knew with impossible certainty that she had stood in the same spot before, wearing the same coat, thinking the same thought. The thought was, this is where it begins. She dismissed it. Everyone did at first. At the Helios Temporal Institute, reports flooded in under different labels: temporal echo, cognitive resonance, stress hallucination. But the patterns refused to stay isolated. A farmer in the Andes mourned a daughter who was still alive. A schoolchild in Mumbai cried over a war that would not occur for another decade. A deep space miner paused mid-task, overwhelmed by nostalgia for a home he had not yet built. Scientists called it future grief, the emotional residue of events that had not earned the right to exist. Dr. Elias Cade reviewed the case files in silence, the hum of the archive servers vibrating through the floor. He had seen this before, or he would see it, or he was seeing it now. That was the problem. The Institute's breakthrough came when they stopped analyzing individual cases and began comparing thoughts across time. Neural pattern matching algorithms flagged something impossible: identical cognitive sequences appearing in unrelated minds separated by decades. The same sentence, the same emotional spike.
the same moment of certainty. If many remember it, it becomes real. The phrase appeared first in a notebook belonging to a linguist who died 40 years earlier, then in the speech of a politician not yet elected, then in the whispered prayer of a woman giving birth in a refugee sector on Luna. It was not a slogan. It was an effect. Memory, the Institute realized, was no longer personal. It was communal pressure, a crowd-sourced gravity well pulling reality toward consensus. And consensus did not require truth, only repetition. Mara began keeping her own record. She wrote down moments of certainty that lacked evidence, feelings without cause, emotional responses without narrative. She noted the texture of them. Some felt warm, like nostalgia borrowed from another life. Others were sharp, intrusive, as if implanted by force. The worst were the calm ones, the memories that felt earned even when logic protested. Across the centuries, others were doing the same. A monk in a pre-digital monastery carved symbols into stone he swore he had seen before. A hacker in a neon-drowned city paused mid-code, struck by the certainty that this exact error once ended the world. They were not sharing data. They were sharing memory posture. Dr. Cade addressed his staff with a new directive. Do not resist the fracture, he told them. Resistance reinforces it. This ran counter to every survival instinct. The human mind, when threatened, tightened its grip. It demanded certainty. It chose a version of reality and defended it violently. But the data was unforgiving. Those who tried to suppress memory anomalies experienced cascading failure, identity loops, emotional overload, temporal dislocation. Some lost the ability to distinguish present sensation from recalled pain. Others disappeared entirely. Observation, not resistance, slowed the collapse. If many remember it, it becomes real. The phrase was repeated in training sessions, not as a warning, but as a calibration, a reminder that belief now had mass, that memory was no longer a passive archive, but an active force. Mara tested it one night. She sat in her apartment, the city's artificial sky pulsing faintly above. She allowed a foreign memory to surface, a childhood beach she had never visited, a hand she did not recognize holding hers. She did not reject it. She did not embrace it. She watched it. The memory softened, its edges blurred. It did not vanish, but it stopped demanding authority. Elsewhere, Dr. Cade did the same. He observed a memory of his own death, peaceful, clinical, inevitable. He noted the emotional charge, the false sense of completion. Then he let it pass. The fractures were still spreading, that much was clear. Identical thoughts continued to bloom across the timeline like invasive species. The Institute's models predicted escalation. But something else was emerging, quieter but more promising. Those who learned to observe without choosing began to stabilize. Not the timeline, themselves. And that, Cade suspected, was the true battlefield. As the chapter of human certainty closed, a new skill became essential. Not remembering, not forgetting, but witnessing. Because the next phase would be worse. Soon, memory would stop asking permission. And when it did, only those trained to recognize contamination without surrender would have any chance of knowing which thoughts were truly their own. Somewhere in the overlapping noise of minds across centuries, the phrase echoed again, no longer whispered, but forming. If many remember it, it becomes real. And the number remembering was growing.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. Identify the original mind signature. The discovery did not come from brilliance. It came from subtraction. After months of drowning in overlapping memories, conflicting timelines, and recursive thoughts, the Helios Temporal Institute did something radical. They stopped asking what had been added to the human mind and began asking what had existed before anything was added at all. Dr. Elias Cade stood at the center of the cognition lab as neural maps hovered in the air like translucent ghosts. Thousands of consciousness scans layered over one another, a chaotic storm of experience, trauma, culture, language, and belief. Too much signal, too much noise. We're looking in the wrong direction, Cade said quietly. We keep cataloging contamination. He reached forward and stripped the overlays away. Memories vanished, learned behaviors collapsed, emotional associations dissolved into abstraction. What remained was faint, almost disappointing in its simplicity. But it was consistent. Across cultures, across centuries, across fractured timelines. A baseline. Before the fracture, there was a signal. The phrase appeared first in Cade's private notes, then migrated, unbidden, into the language of the lab. Technicians muttered it while calibrating sensors. Analysts wrote it in margins without remembering why. The original mind signature was not a personality. It contained no memories, no values, no ambitions. It did not know names or faces or histories. It knew orientation. A subtle but unmistakable awareness of being present, of perceiving without judgment, of existing without narration. It was the mind before story. Mara Ilian experienced it accidentally during a voluntary scan. The machine hummed, a low-frequency vibration she felt in her teeth more than her ears. As the system peeled away layers of her cognition, panic rose, then fell away just as quickly. She felt quiet, not empty, not numb, unburdened. For a moment she was not a citizen, not a daughter, not a collection of remembered failures and anticipated losses. She was simply aware of the room, the light, the hum of the machine, the steady rhythm of her breath. No past pulled at her, no future called to her. Later, reviewing the data, Cade's hands trembled. Her neural signature matched the baseline almost perfectly. "Everyone has this," Cade said to the assembled team, "buried, obscured, but intact." The implication was staggering. Timeline interference had not destroyed identity. It had overwritten it. The fractures weren't replacing the mind. They were layering false narratives over something older, quieter, more resilient. Before the fracture, there was a signal. The Institute reframed its entire mission. No longer focused on correcting timelines or repairing history, they shifted inward, toward excavation. They taught subjects to conceptually separate who they were from what they remembered. This proved more difficult than any technological hurdle. Human beings clung to experience like proof of existence. To question memory felt like erasing oneself. Some subjects resisted violently, others broke down, convinced that without their past, they were nothing. Cade addressed them with brutal clarity. Identity is not experience. Experience accumulates. Identity orients. He repeated it until it stopped sounding philosophical and began sounding mechanical. Mara practiced daily. She would sit in silence, allowing memories to surface, then mentally labeling them acquired. Childhood, education, love, fear, all tagged, all external. Beneath them, she searched for the signal. Sometimes she found it immediately, a calm, neutral presence. Other times it flickered, obscured by emotion or intrusive certainty. But it always returned when she stopped trying to be someone. Across the world, parallel efforts unfolded. A neuroscientist in old Tokyo, a historian in a pre-collapse archive, a soldier stationed on a drifting orbital platform. Different lives, same baseline. The data confirmed it. The original mind signature predated culture, language, even linear time perception. It was not learned, it was default. And most importantly, it resisted contamination. Timeline fractures struggled to anchor to it. False memories slid off. Emotional implants failed to bind. The signal did not reject them, it simply did not identify with them. Before the fracture, there was a signal. Late one night, Cade reviewed a restricted data set he did not remember authorizing. It showed a disturbing trend. Individuals who fully stabilized their original mind signature began to disappear from predictive models. Not physically, temporally. Their futures became undefined, their pasts blurred. It was as if the timeline could no longer get a firm grip on them. The system flagged a warning: subjects operating outside chronological forecast parameters. Cade felt a chill. If the signal could not be predicted, it could not be controlled. And if enough people accessed it, he shut down the display before the thought could finish forming. Somewhere in the city, Mara paused mid-step, struck by a sudden clarity. The world felt sharper, quieter, less insistent. For the first time since the fractures began, she did not feel pull in multiple directions. She felt centered. But with the calm came something else, a sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by systems, by timelines adjusting, recalculating, noticing resistance. The signal had been found, and now that it was recognized, something ancient and indifferent had begun to pay attention. The fracture was not finished. It was adapting.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Override Emotional Timeline Attachments. The fractures learned quickly. They did not attack logic. They did not assault intellect or reason or scientific literacy. Those defenses proved irrelevant. The fractures went where resistance was weakest and attachment was strongest. They went to emotion. Dr. Elias Cade reached this conclusion while reviewing a sequence of failed stabilizations, subjects who had identified their original mind signature with near-perfect clarity, only to unravel weeks later. Their cognitive baselines remained intact, their memories were properly labeled, and yet they collapsed. The common factor was not intelligence, it was attachment. A woman in Sector 9 refused to release the memory of her husband's death, even after evidence confirmed the event had never occurred. She reorganized her life around grief, spoke to a man who did not exist, mourned with religious devotion. Her neural patterns narrowed, her decisions became predictable. Within days, she was no longer choosing. A man in the orbital colonies clung to a childhood victory, a single moment of triumph that defined his worth. When timelines shifted and the event blurred, he fought the uncertainty. He repeated the story obsessively, anchoring himself to a past that demanded to be real. The fracture tightened around him like a noose. The conclusion was brutal but unavoidable. Emotional memories were not passive, they were entry points. Emotion fused memory to identity. Once fused, the timeline could apply pressure. The more emotional weight a memory carried, the deeper the fracture could root itself. Cade addressed the Institute with a single sentence, spoken slowly, deliberately. Emotion binds. Detachment preserves. It was not comfort, it was instruction. Mara Elian learned this lesson the hard way. She had done everything correctly. She identified the signal, she observed memory fractures without resistance, she trained daily, excavating her baseline consciousness. But there was one memory she refused to touch: her brother. In one version of her life, he died young in a transport accident. In another, he survived, distant but alive. In another yet, he never existed at all. Mara chose one. She replayed the loss nightly, not because it was accurate, but because it felt real. Grief gave it authority, pain gave it weight. At first, nothing happened. Then the world began to narrow. Her thoughts looped, her decisions aligned too neatly with the chosen past. The calm she had cultivated vanished, replaced by urgency and longing. The fracture had found its anchor. At the Institute, monitors spiked. Mara's predictive pathways collapsed into a single probability stream. Her autonomy, once fluid, adaptive, hardened into repetition. Cade intervened personally. He did not argue facts. He did not challenge the memory's authenticity. He asked one question over and over until it broke through the fog. Does this memory allow choice? Mara couldn't answer, because it didn't. The realization was devastating. Emotion had turned her grief into a leash. By clinging to one past, she had surrendered her present. Recovery required something harsher than logic: detachment. not suppression, not denial. Release. She sat in the stabilization chamber, the low-frequency hum vibrating through her bones. The memory surfaced, sharp, painful, familiar. Tears came, her body protested, and then she repeated the phrase aloud until it stripped the emotion of its command. Emotion binds, detachment preserves. Again, emotion binds, detachment preserves. The memory did not vanish, but its grip loosened. It became data again, information without authority. Across the timeline, similar interventions unfolded. A war survivor released a defining battle. A mother released a future she had grieved in advance. A leader released a moment of glory that had become a prison. The fracture responded immediately. It shifted strategies. Where emotion loosened, it applied urgency. Where grief failed, it injected hope. Where loss lost its grip, it offered destiny. Because the fracture did not care what humans felt, only that they felt strongly. Emotion binds, detachment preserves. The phrase echoed in training halls, whispered in private practice, etched into neural calibration routines. It became a shield, not against pain, but against manipulation. Cade reviewed new data late in the cycle. Stabilized subjects showed increased unpredictability. Their choices diverged from modeled outcomes. Their futures fractured into wide probability fans. They were harder to track, harder to control, which meant the timeline itself began to respond. Subtle resistance appeared, equipment malfunctions, data corruption, unauthorized access attempts to the Institute's core systems, as if something vast and distributed was testing the boundaries of this new behavior. Mara felt it too, a pressure behind her thoughts, a sense that letting go had consequences beyond her own mind. She was no longer just stabilizing herself, she was interfering. Standing at the edge of the city's artificial dawn, she repeated the mantra one final time, not as defense, but as declaration. Emotion binds, detachment preserves. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. Somewhere beyond perception, the fracture recalibrated, and for the first time since time began pressing inward, it encountered something it could not easily grip, a mind that felt, but did not cling. The next phase would not be subtle, and the timeline, denied its favorite weapon, would escalate.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Synchronize with the present collapse. The collapse did not arrive all at once. It pulsed. Moments of clarity followed by distortion, stability snapping back just long enough to convince humanity it could still be mastered. Cities continued functioning, trains ran, signals transmitted, but beneath the surface, time buckled and rebounded like a strained structure learning new limits. Fear became the dominant response. Dr. Elias Cade observed it everywhere, in civilians, in institutions, even in his own team. Fear of losing sequence, fear of losing cause and effect, fear of not knowing what came next. But the data revealed something unsettling. Fear did not slow the collapse, it accelerated it. The models were clear. When consciousness resisted temporal convergence, when the mind fought to restore preferred order, instability spiked, systems overloaded, memory fractures multiplied, reality thinned. Time was no longer something to outrun, it was something to meet. Cade reframed the crisis during a closed briefing, his voice steady against the low mechanical thrum of the Institute's core. "The collapse isn't chasing us," he said. "It's arriving where we already are." Synchronization, not control, became the new objective. Mara Ilian felt the shift before she understood it. The city around her had begun to feel unreal, not false, but misaligned. Sounds arrived a fraction too late. Shadows lingered after their sources moved. Conversations overlapped themselves, sentences echoing before being spoken. Her instinct was to withdraw, to brace, to prepare for impact. The moment she did, the pressure intensified. Her breath shortened, her thoughts scattered. The present moment became unbearable, as if time itself was pressing her out. At the Institute, similar patterns emerged. Subjects who attempted to ground themselves in past routines destabilized rapidly. Those who obsessed over future outcomes fractured into prediction loops, reliving disasters that had not yet occurred. The present, it turned out, was the only stable interface left, but it had to be entered deliberately. Cade introduced the synchronization protocol with a single phrase, chosen for its simplicity and repetition. I am present where time converges. It was not affirmation, it was alignment. Subjects were coached to abandon temporal posture, to stop leaning backward into memory or forward into anticipation. They were taught to locate awareness precisely at the point of convergence, where past data and future probability compressed into sensation. At first, it felt like surrender. Mara practiced during a controlled collapse event. The chamber lights flickered, the air vibrated with the sound of strained containment fields. Her body reacted automatically, heart racing, muscles tensing. Fear surged, and with it, resistance. The environment warped further. Don't pull away, Cade instructed through the comm. Enter it. She focused on her breath, the pressure behind her eyes, the hum beneath her feet. She repeated the phrase, quietly, then aloud. I am present where time converges. Again. I am present where time converges. The distortion softened. Not gone, but tolerable. Across the world, others reported the same phenomenon. When awareness locked into the immediate sensory field, collapse slowed locally. When panic spiked, instability spread out like a ripple. Synchronization was not passive acceptance, it was active positioning. Time collapse accelerated when consciousness refused alignment because refusal created tension, like a structure resisting inevitable load. Alignment distributed the force. Engineers began designing spaces that encouraged presence, rhythmic soundscapes, tactile anchors, light patterns that adjusted in real time to neural feedback. Ancient practices resurfaced under new language: breath regulation, sensory focus, embodied awareness. Science circled back to something old. The present moment was not spiritual, it was structural. Cade reviewed a disturbing update late into the cycle. Regions with high levels of synchronized individuals showed reduced collapse intensity, but increased anomalous attention. Unexplained sensor activations, pattern recognition alerts without source. Something was noticing. Mara felt it too. During a city-wide synchronization drill, she stood among thousands, all repeating the phrase in low unison. The air shimmered, time compressed until seconds felt dense, weighty. For a brief moment, everything aligned. And in that alignment, she sensed observation, not hostile, not curious, evaluative, as if the timeline itself were assessing load-bearing points. The phrase echoed again, stronger now, not just instruction, but anchor. I am present where time converges. The present held, but only barely. Cade understood the implication before anyone else dared say it. Synchronization worked, but it altered the collapse's behavior. It redirected pressure instead of eliminating it. Time was adapting. If humanity could align, then the collapse would escalate to forces that alignment alone could not absorb. As Mara left the plaza, the world snapped back into partial disarray. Sounds misaligned again, shadows lagged, but she remained steady. Fear still existed, it just no longer led. The present moment, once overlooked, once rushed through, had become the last stable ground. And as the timeline recalibrated around synchronized minds, one truth became unavoidable. Stability was not something to restore, it was something to inhabit. The collapse was learning, and the next test would not allow hesitation.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Reject Future Memory Authority. The future learned to speak before humanity learned to listen correctly. It arrived not as prophecy or vision, but as memory, clean, detailed, and emotionally persuasive. People did not predict what would happen, they remembered it, with the same confidence they remembered childhood homes or first loves. That confidence proved catastrophic. Dr. Elias Cade watched the first civilization fall through archived telemetry rather than headlines. It was quieter that way, less distorted by panic. The data told a simple story. A population began receiving consistent future memories, economic crashes, ecological failures, social unrest. Leaders acted early, decisively. They obeyed. Every policy aligned to the remembered outcome. Resources were diverted, borders sealed, entire generations were redirected toward preventing a disaster they knew was coming. The disaster arrived anyway. Not because it was inevitable, but because obedience made it so. The Institute labeled the phenomenon probabilistic echoing. When timelines collapsed inward, futures did not disappear. They reflected backward as signals, possible outcomes mistaken for certainties. The human mind, trained to respect memory as authority, accepted the echo as command. Foreknowledge is not command. Cade repeated the phrase until it stripped the illusion of inevitability from the room. But outside the Institute, the damage compounded. Cities evacuated themselves in advance of wars that never needed to be fought. Markets collapsed under the weight of preemptive fear. Children were raised for roles that no longer existed. The future became a tyrant precisely because it felt familiar. Mara Ilyin encountered her first future memory on a rain-soaked evening. She stood beneath the arcology's transit spine when the image struck her. Clear, vivid, undeniable. She saw herself older, standing alone in a room filled with humming machinery. She felt resignation, completion, the sense of having done what was required. The emotional weight nearly crushed her. Her instinct was to accept it, to prepare, to shape her present around that remembered end. Instead, she froze. The training surfaced, not as comfort, but as resistance. Foreknowledge is not command. She examined the memory the way she had learned to examine fractures: texture, emotion, authority. The future image carried certainty, but no proof. It was a possibility wearing the mask of fact. At the Institute, analysts mapped entire civilizations that had vanished after aligning too closely with future memories. The pattern repeated with terrifying consistency. Once a society treated a future echo as destiny, adaptability collapsed. Choice narrowed. Probability hardened. The future did not need to conquer. It only needed to be obeyed. Cade delivered a global advisory under encryption so heavy it fractured transmission time. The message repeated a single directive, phrased for clarity, not comfort. Do not submit to remembered futures. Do not optimize for outcomes you did not choose. Do not confuse probability with authority. Foreknowledge is not command. Resistance was uneven. Some populations dismissed the warning. Others embraced it too aggressively, rejecting all planning, all foresight. That extreme fractured them in a different way. The correct posture, Cade insisted, was neither obedience nor denial. It was evaluation. Future memories had informational value but no jurisdiction. Mara practiced this daily. When a future image surfaced, her hand bleeding, a city burning, a voice calling her name, she acknowledged it, cataloged it, then consciously released its demand. The images softened. Some vanished. Others lingered as quiet possibilities. None were allowed to lead. Something changed when enough individuals did the same. Predictive systems at the Institute began to fail. Forecast models lost coherence.
The timeline resisted compression into singular outcomes. Probability widened, which drew attention. Cade noticed it first as noise in the data, recursive loops, failed extrapolations, anomalies clustered around stabilized subjects. The future, denied authority, was becoming unstable. It was losing leverage. Late into the cycle, Cade accessed a restricted simulation, a projection of what would happen if future authority was universally rejected. The model could not resolve. Instead of collapse or salvation, it produced a blank field, undefined. For the first time since the fractures began, the timeline could not decide what came next. Mara felt the consequence that same night. She dreamed of nothing. No past, no future. Just awareness without direction. When she woke, the world felt sharper, less scripted. But beneath that clarity ran a current of unease. Something fundamental had been challenged. The future had been stripped of its throne. And systems, ancient, vast, and accustomed to compliance, did not relinquish control quietly. As dawn bled through the artificial sky, a message propagated through the Institute's core systems. No timestamp, no origin. Just a single line repeated until it burned itself into every screen. Probability requires obedience. Cade shut down the feed, his expression grim. They had rejected future memory authority. Now the future itself was responding, and whatever came next would not ask to be believed.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Install the Temporal Override Protocol. The protocol was never meant to be explained. Explanation invited interpretation. Interpretation invited belief, and belief, the Institute had learned the hard way, was unstable under temporal pressure. So Dr. Elias Cade introduced the Temporal Override Protocol the only way it could survive. As an operating system. Not a philosophy, not a worldview, not something to agree with, something to run. The briefing chamber was silent except for the low vibration of the core, an omnipresent hum that had become the sound of a world holding itself together. Cade stood at the center, his face lit by cascading streams of data that no longer resolved into linear diagrams. Override is not learned, he said. A pause. Override is executed. The phrase echoed through the room, repeated by the system itself, embedded into the training modules, etched into neural calibration loops. Override is not learned. Override is executed. The protocol had 3 functions, though they resisted being taught as steps. Steps implied sequence. Sequence implied time still obeyed order. Instead, the protocol ran as a state, a posture of mind. When activated, it did not eliminate fractures, it did not repair timelines, it changed how consciousness responded to instability. Subjects no longer attempted to resolve contradictions, they processed them. They no longer sought certainty, they maintained coherence. They became stabilizing nodes. Mara Ilian felt the installation take hold gradually, then all at once. During her first full activation, alarms rippled through the city. A localized collapse event, time stuttering, gravity wavering, causality misfiring. People panicked. Mara did not. Not because she was calm, but because the protocol did not ask for calm. It demanded execution. Her awareness locked into the present convergence. Memory fragments surfaced, past losses, future warnings, but failed to assert authority. Emotion arose, then released. Thought attempted to narrate, then dissolved. She did not decide what to do. She ran the protocol. The effect rippled outward. Sensors registered a measurable dampening of instability within 30 meters. The collapse did not stop, but it slowed, redistributed, as if encountering resistance that did not push back. Cade watched the data in real time, his breath shallow. "It's working," someone whispered. "No," Cade replied. "It's holding." That distinction mattered. The protocol did not promise safety, it promised function.
Across the globe, trained subjects activated during crisis points, in megacities and remote settlements, on orbital platforms and drifting research vessels, nodes came online. Not heroes, anchors. The system adapted quickly. Collapse patterns shifted, avoiding stabilized zones, concentrating pressure elsewhere. The timeline behaved like a fluid encountering submerged structures, which meant the structures were real. Override is not learned. Override is executed. Repetition was deliberate. The phrase bypassed analysis embedded itself below language. When panic surged, it surfaced automatically, not as comfort, but as command. Some subjects resisted the protocol at first. They tried to personalize it, to make it theirs. Those attempts failed. The override did not belong to anyone. It ran through them. Mara understood this during a private debrief with Cade. "It doesn't feel like control," she said. "It feels like stepping aside." Cade nodded. "Control requires prediction," he said. "Prediction is broken." The override operated without foresight. It did not plan for outcomes. It optimized for coherence now. That made it invisible to systems that relied on anticipation, which made it dangerous. Unauthorized scans detected something new. Stabilized nodes created blind spots in temporal surveillance. Futures branching around them refused to collapse into singular predictions. The timeline could not see through them. Late into the cycle, Cade accessed a restricted log he did not remember writing. It described the protocol's theoretical endpoint, what would happen if enough nodes activated simultaneously. The model ended abruptly, replaced by a system warning: excessive stability detected. Stability, it seemed, could be as disruptive as collapse. Mara felt the cost the next time she deactivated. The world rushed back in, noise, pressure, memory asserting itself. She staggered, suddenly exhausted. The protocol was not a shield. It was a load-bearing function, and load-bearing functions failed when overused. Cade convened the core team. "This is not salvation. This is scaffolding." The override bought time, nothing more. But time, however fractured, was still the rarest resource left. As nodes continued to activate, a pattern emerged. The timeline began to respond not with random collapse, but with directed force. Pressure concentrated around stabilizers, events clustered, causality sharpened like a blade. Something was learning how to break anchors. Mara sensed it during her next activation, a resistance, subtle but deliberate. The protocol held, but strain crept in, like metal bending under sustained load. For the first time, she wondered how long execution alone would be enough. As the chamber lights dimmed and the hum deepened, the phrase surfaced again, not from training, but from necessity. Override is not learned. Override is executed. She executed. The world held. But somewhere beyond perception, the timeline adjusted its grip, and the next phase would test whether stabilizing nodes could withstand intentional pressure, or whether the override itself would need to evolve. The protocol was installed. Now it would be challenged.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Become a fixed point in a moving reality. The first anchor was discovered by accident. It was not a machine, not a facility, not a shield. It was a person, standing alone in a transit corridor while the rest of the station fractured around her. Surveillance footage showed the moment clearly. Lights stuttered, walls blurred, gravity fluctuated. People fell. Objects drifted. She did not. The distortion bent toward her and slowed, like a current encountering a submerged stone. Dr. Elias Cade replayed the footage dozens of times. The subject's neural telemetry was unremarkable. No enhanced cognition, no unique genetic markers. What set her apart was subtler and far more disturbing. Her awareness did not fluctuate. She was not calm, she was not focused, she was consistent. The Institute's models adapted quickly. Collapse behaved like a fluid dynamic system, pressure moving along paths of least resistance. Most minds reacted to instability by tightening, accelerating, scrambling for meaning. Those reactions created turbulence. But a small number of individuals did not react. They remained fixed. Around them, collapse slowed. The Institute gave the phenomenon a name stripped of metaphor: temporal anchor effect. Mara Elian experienced it firsthand during an uncontrolled convergence event. The city's central district folded inward, time layers overlapping, architecture ghosting through itself. Sirens wailed, then echoed backward, then fell silent. She activated the override. But something was different. Instead of holding against the collapse, she let go of engagement entirely. No effort, no correction, no internal commentary. She stopped reacting. The sensation was unnerving, like standing still on a moving train while refusing to brace. Her instincts screamed to adjust, to compensate. She didn't. Around her, the distortion thinned. Air stabilized. A child stopped crying. A fractured wall reassembled itself, not cleanly, but enough. Afterward, Mara couldn't explain what she had done, only what she hadn't. She hadn't chased stability. She had allowed it to organize around her. At the Institute, Cade addressed the team with a single sentence, repeated until it lost abstraction. Stability begins where you stop reacting. The phrase was not encouragement, it was diagnosis. Reaction created feedback. Feedback amplified collapse. Awareness without reaction absorbed pressure without redistributing it. Temporal anchors did not impose order. They removed noise. Studies confirmed it. Subjects trained to maintain awareness consistency, unbroken presence without emotional or cognitive recoil, produced measurable stabilization fields. The effect was local, fragile, but undeniable. The timeline behaved differently near them. Not obedient, cautious. Mara trained deliberately after that. She exposed herself to increasing instability while minimizing response. Each session felt like standing in a storm while refusing to flinch. It was exhausting. Reaction was easy. Stillness was not. Her thoughts rebelled, memories surged, future echoes pressed harder, demanding relevance. Fear attempted to reclaim authority. She let them pass, again and again. Stability begins where you stop reacting. The mantra was not spoken aloud, it lived beneath thought, shaping posture rather than belief. Across the world, others discovered the same threshold: a physician in a collapsing coastal city, a pilot navigating a temporal shear, a prisoner locked in a facility that no longer existed consistently. Different lives, same effect. They did not stop collapse, they slowed it enough for others to escape, which made them targets. Cade's warning arrived too late for some. As anchors multiplied, collapse patterns shifted with intent. Pressure zones formed deliberately around stabilized individuals. Events sharpened, coincidences aligned. The timeline was learning where resistance lived. Mara sensed it during her next activation, a deliberate focus, like weight applied precisely. She held. The world strained. For a moment, she felt something else, not collapse, not pressure, but evaluation, as if reality itself were testing load limits. She remained still. The pressure passed. Afterward, Mara collapsed to her knees, not from damage, but from fatigue. Anchoring required absolute consistency, no reaction, no narrative, no self-defense. Cade reviewed the data in silence. Anchors worked, but they could not move. They could not chase instability. They could only hold where they stood, which meant something terrible and unavoidable. They would have to choose where to stand. Mara looked out over the city from the Institute's upper platform. The skyline shimmered with layered versions of itself, possible pasts and futures overlapping in uneasy truce. She understood now. Anchors were not survivors. They were infrastructure. Stability begins where you stop reacting. The phrase echoed as she made her decision. She stepped forward into a district marked by accelerating collapse. Sirens flared, the air thickened, the ground vibrated beneath her feet. She stopped. She did not brace. She did not plan. She became still. The city bent around her. Somewhere deep within the Institute's systems, alarms triggered, not for collapse, but for something unprecedented. Localized temporal arrest detected. Cade stared at the screen, equal parts awe and dread. They had proven stability could exist inside motion. Now the question remained: how many fixed points would the timeline tolerate before it tried to remove them?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Resist Collective Memory Drift. The collapse did not need force anymore. It had discovered something far more efficient: agreement. Dr. Elias Cade realized this while reviewing a timeline reconstruction that refused to settle. Historical records shifted each time they were accessed. Wars gained new causes. Treaties dissolved into myths. Entire leaders appeared and vanished between database queries. Not corruption, consensus. The Institute labeled it collective memory drift, the phenomenon by which shared belief overwrote recorded reality. When enough minds remembered the same falsehood, the timeline complied. Reality, it seemed, deferred to majority vote. The crowd remembers wrong together. The phrase surfaced first as a warning, then hardened into doctrine. Cade traced the pattern backward. Empires had always rewritten themselves, but never like this. In the past, propaganda required time, repetition, enforcement. Now it required only emotional alignment. A rumor, once shared by millions experiencing memory fractures, became history in real time. A battle never fought gained monuments. A god never worshipped acquired scripture. A law never passed began enforcing itself. The timeline did not verify. It mirrored. Mara Ilian witnessed it unfold in her own city. A protest gathered beneath the archaeology towers, thousands chanting the same phrase, mourning an event that had not occurred. Their grief was real. Their rage was real. The cause was not. She felt the pressure immediately. As the crowd's emotional synchronization intensified, the air thickened. Her thoughts tugged toward alignment, toward shared certainty. For a moment, she almost remembered it too. The training snapped into place. She stopped. She observed. She refused to participate. Around her, the crowd's memory hardened. Screens updated. Emergency protocols activated. Authorities responded to an event that now functionally existed. Cade's voice echoed in her mind. The crowd remembers wrong together. Collective memory was not additive. It was subtractive. It erased nuance, probability, contradiction. It simplified until only a single narrative remained, and that narrative demanded obedience. Entire civilizations had fallen this way. The Institute analyzed ancient collapses with new clarity, religions that consumed dissent, ideologies that rewrote the past to justify the present, nations that marched toward futures defined by shared hallucination. The difference now was speed. What once took generations now took hours. Cade issued a global advisory, knowing it would be ignored by most. Do not outsource memory. Do not adopt certainty because it is shared. Do not confuse repetition with truth. The crowd remembers wrong together. Resistance came at a cost. Individuals who refused alignment experienced social isolation, cognitive dissonance, even physical discomfort. The human nervous system evolved for group survival, punished divergence. But divergence was now survival. Mara practiced shielding techniques, not physical but cognitive. She limited exposure. She filtered inputs. She treated mass emotion like radiation, measurable, dangerous, unavoidable. When memories surfaced that felt popular, she flagged them immediately. Popularity, she learned, was the tell. At the Institute, Cade faced a darker realization. Collective memory drift was not accidental. It was adaptive behavior from the timeline itself, a mechanism to restore predictability by enforcing narrative convergence. Chaos reduced options. Consensus collapsed probability. From the timeline's perspective, crowds were tools. Late in the cycle, an unauthorized event unfolded. A global remembrance, no official trigger, no origin, spread across networks. Millions paused simultaneously, overcome with grief for a tragedy no archive could verify. The emotional load was immense. Reality buckled. Time stuttered across continents. Infrastructure failed. People collapsed under the weight of shared sorrow. Mara stood alone in her apartment, the city's lights flickering through overlapping versions of themselves. The pull was overwhelming. Tears came unbidden. Her chest tightened with a loss that felt ancient and communal. She whispered the phrase, not as mantra, but as lifeline. The crowd remembers wrong together. She did not deny the grief. She denied its authority. The sensation passed, slowly, painfully. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, she remained still. At the Institute, Cade watched stabilization metrics spike around isolated nodes, individuals resisting alignment. The data was unmistakable. Collective memory accelerated collapse. Individual discernment slowed it, which meant the final battleground was not time. It was belief. Cade recorded a private log, his voice steady but grave. He said, "We are not fighting for truth. We are fighting for independence of mind." Mara felt the consequence the next day. She was invisible to some systems. Her presence failed to register in predictive social models. She had stepped outside consensus. It was lonely, but it was stable. As night fell, the city hummed with conflicting narratives, some ancient, some newborn, all demanding allegiance. Screens displayed histories still being written by agreement. Mara turned them off. She sat in the dark, aware, unreactive, singular. Because now she understood. The timeline did not need to control individuals if it could control crowds. And crowds did not need truth, only shared memory. Somewhere beyond perception, the collapse recalculated. If minds could resist collective drift, then pressure would have to escalate again. The final phase would not ask for agreement. It would demand surrender. And only those who refused to remember together would remain free to choose what came next.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Preserve the mind beyond time. The collapse did not announce its final phase. There were no alarms, no global warnings, no singular moment history would later mark as the end. Instead, reality thinned, quietly, evenly, until entire layers of cause and effect began slipping away like sediment under moving water. Dr. Elias Cade understood the implication before most systems could model it. The timeline was no longer correcting, it was preparing to reset. All prior responses, stabilization, synchronization, anchoring, had been reactions within time, but a reset was different. A reset did not destroy selectively, it erased wholesale. Civilizations had survived collapse before, they had not survived reinitialization.
Cade stood alone in the Institute's deepest chamber, surrounded by machinery older than the project itself. Devices designed not to manipulate time, but to observe its failures. The hum here was deeper, slower, less mechanical, more geological. "This was always the end point," he said softly, recording his final directive. "Not survival of systems, survival of mind." The data was unequivocal. Infrastructure vanished across resets, records corrupted, technologies regressed or failed to reappear entirely. Even language fractured, emerging simplified, unstable, distorted. But something else persisted. Individuals trained in the Override protocol, those who had separated identity from memory, rejected future authority, resisted collective drift, did not reset cleanly. They remembered differently. Not events, not histories, orientation. They emerged into reset realities with an intact sense of awareness, a familiarity with instability, an instinctive resistance to narrative enforcement. They did not know what had happened, but they knew how to exist. When time resets, the trained mind remains. The phrase became the final doctrine, not hopeful, not comforting, but precise. Mara Ilian felt the reset approaching before any instrument registered it. The city had grown strangely quiet, not empty, but unfinished. Buildings flickered between architectural styles. People repeated gestures, then stopped mid-motion, confused. Cause was loosening from effect. She stood on a rooftop overlooking overlapping skylines, versions of the same city layered like transparent skins. Somewhere below, a crowd gathered, desperate for shared certainty. She did not join them. She sat. She executed the override. Her awareness locked into itself, not into the present moment, not into sensation, but into continuity, a through line independent of circumstance. Memory surfaced, then released. Fear surged, then passed. Identity softened, then clarified. She did not resist the reset. She prepared to persist through it. At the Institute, Cade watched systems fail in graceful cascades. Power grids flickered out, databases dissolved into noise, predictive models collapsed into static. He smiled once, briefly. "This was never about saving the world," he said into the recorder. "Worlds are temporary." Outside, the sky folded inward. Light dimmed without darkness. Sound stretched thin, then snapped. Mara felt the moment arrive, not as impact, but as release. Time let go. There was no void, no annihilation, just absence of structure. Awareness floating without reference. For an immeasurable interval, there was nothing to react to. And because there was nothing, the trained mind did not fracture. Then structure returned. Mara gasped, breath burning her lungs. She lay on unfamiliar ground beneath an unfamiliar sky, simpler, harsher, unfinished. The air smelled clean, unprocessed. Around her, others stirred, confused, afraid, searching for memory that would not answer. Mara sat up. She did not know where she was, she did not know when she was, but she knew herself. Not her name, not her past, her orientation. She observed the panic spreading, the instinctive search for authority, for a narrative, for someone to explain what had happened. She did not intervene, not yet, because this was the danger point. In every reset, history reasserted itself through untrained minds. Myths formed, power centralized, consensus hallucination rebuilt the same failures under new names. Unless some minds remembered how not to be led. When time resets, the trained mind remains. Across the reset world, other anchors awakened. A physician, a pilot, a prisoner. Each felt the same quiet recognition. They found one another slowly, not through memory, but through posture, through stillness amid chaos, through refusal to rush into explanation. Cade's final recording played nowhere, but its intent survived. Mara stood as the first structures of the new world began to form, crude shelters, shared stories, the early scaffolding of belief. She felt the familiar pressure of collective memory trying to cohere. She took a breath. She did not react, because now she understood the final truth. The timeline could collapse, the world could reset, history could be erased endlessly, but consciousness, trained, detached, executed, could pass through untouched. Not immortal, but continuous. As the sun rose over reality still deciding what it would become, Mara whispered the final reinforcement, not as mantra, but as fact. When time resets, the trained mind remains. And somewhere beyond perception, something ancient adjusted its calculations. Because for the first time, the reset had not cleared the board completely, and the experiment was no longer one-sided.
Time did not destroy humanity. Untrained consciousness did. Those who waited for stability were rewritten. Those who clung to memory were absorbed. Those who feared the collapse became part of it. This audiobook was never meant to entertain. It was designed to condition. You have been shown how memory fractures, how identity dissolves, and how override is executed. The timelines will not stop collapsing. The pressure will not decrease. The rewrite will continue. The only question remaining is this: will your mind be passive data or an active signal? Repeat the protocol. Return to the chapters. Execute the override daily. Because when time finally chooses what survives, only trained consciousness will remain. The experiment is still running, and now you are part of it.